What if the very ways you've been surviving are the chains holding you back? We all build armor, habits, thoughts, behaviors designed to shield us from pain, trauma, or stress. These aren't just random patterns. They are the tools that kept you alive when life felt unbearable. But here's the hard, unspoken truth. Those same tools that once saved you are now the walls confining you. You wear your coping mechanisms like a badge of survival, but beneath the surface, they're draining your energy, breaking your connections, and fracturing your inner world. Survival is a baseline, not a destination. If you want peace, real, lasting peace, you have to ask yourself the brutal question: what if what's keeping you alive is also the thing keeping you stuck? It's time to stop managing pain and start healing beyond it. Before we begin, this video is for educational purposes only. It is not a substitute for professional mental health advice. Please reach out to a licensed therapist if you're struggling. Coping mechanisms are born out of necessity. When life overwhelms us, our brain and body scramble to find solutions, quick fixes that blunt immediate pain or anxiety. This adaptive response is a survival function. Whether it's distracting yourself from emotional distress, withdrawing from conflict, or using humor to deflect discomfort, these behaviors serve a critical purpose. They stabilize you in moments when raw feelings feel unbearable. Without them, the flood of distress could easily become paralyzing. However, the very nature of these strategies is to provide short-term relief, not long-term healing. What starts as a tool to ease suffering can calcify into a habitual response that limits growth. When avoidance becomes the default, it doesn't just protect you from pain, it cuts off access to important parts of your emotional experience. Numbness replaces feeling, and over time, this blunted state can lead to a loss of vitality and authentic connection with yourself and others. Take people-pleasing, for example. On the surface, it looks like kindness or generosity, traits we admire. But beneath that surface often lies a subtle erasure of self. By constantly prioritizing others' needs to avoid conflict or rejection, you sacrifice your own desires, boundaries, and sense of identity. The coping mechanism that once kept you safe socially eventually traps you in a cycle of resentment, exhaustion, and invisibility. It's no longer about survival. It's about losing yourself. Anger, too, is a classic double-edged sword. Initially, it can be a powerful way to assert boundaries or express frustration. But when it morphs into aggression, unchecked, chronic, or explosive, it often alienates those closest to you. The very emotion meant to protect your dignity becomes a weapon that isolates you. This transformation reflects how coping mechanisms, unchecked, can degrade into patterns that deepen loneliness rather than prevent harm. This dynamic highlights a critical truth. Coping mechanisms trade immediate relief for long-term costs. They create a paradox where the solution to pain becomes its perpetuator. Emotional exhaustion, fractured relationships, and persistent inner conflict are the hidden prices paid. The brain settles into these familiar patterns because they work in the moment, but they also reinforce the pain they're supposed to manage, creating a cycle that's hard to break. Understanding this double-edged nature is the first step toward change. It requires courage to face the paradox, to admit that what has kept you alive may no longer serve you. But within this discomfort lies possibility. Once you recognize the limits of survival tools, you open the door to new ways of being, healthier strategies that don't just numb or defend, but help you truly heal and thrive. The challenge is to learn how to let go without losing yourself, and that begins with deep awareness and self-compassion. Most coping mechanisms operate beneath the surface of awareness. They're automatic, ingrained responses shaped by early experiences, trauma, or survival needs. Because these behaviors become habitual, they don't always register as coping at all, they simply are. This automaticity creates a kind of stealth mode for suffering, where you're caught in cycles of behavior without fully recognizing the underlying emotional currents driving them. Because these patterns live in the unconscious, they can repeat endlessly without conscious intervention. You might find yourself overworking, not because you love the job or want achievement for its own sake, but because being busy keeps painful feelings at bay. The distraction becomes a way to avoid confronting internal discomfort, a survival tactic that has become a trap, narrowing your sense of self and priorities without your explicit knowledge. Similarly, substance use often begins as a deliberate attempt to soothe distress, a way to dull overwhelming emotions or memories. Over time, this choice morphs into habit, sometimes compulsive. The original pain remains unprocessed, buried beneath layers of chemical sedation. The coping becomes a mask that hides the raw vulnerability underneath, but at the cost of deepening disconnection from what's real and authentic inside you. Perfectionism is another unconscious strategy that often masquerades as ambition or discipline. But beneath the surface, it's frequently a defense against fear of criticism, rejection, or failure. By setting impossibly high standards, you attempt to control external judgment and internal anxiety. Yet this pursuit of flawlessness is exhausting and isolating because it disconnects you from the messy, imperfect, and fundamentally human experience of simply being enough as you are. This unconscious nature of coping means the real emotional needs are masked or neglected. When you're caught in these automatic cycles, you lose touch with your true self, your desires, vulnerabilities, and limits. The price of survival becomes a fractured relationship with your own inner world, where genuine needs are silenced in favor of maintaining control or avoiding pain. Awareness is the key that unlocks this cycle. But awareness isn't about blame or judgment. It's about curiosity and kindness toward yourself. When you begin to notice these unconscious patterns, you reclaim power over them. You can start to ask, what am I avoiding? What am I protecting? What do I actually need? This conscious inquiry creates space for healing and for developing healthier, more aligned ways to meet life's challenges without losing yourself in the process. Coping without awareness is like running on a treadmill set to survival mode. You're expending energy, but you're not moving forward. When coping mechanisms function without conscious insight, they keep you locked in the same reactive patterns that once helped you endure hardship, but now prevent you from truly healing. Without shining a light on what lies beneath, survival becomes a static state, and growth stalls. Dr. Gabor Mate's work offers profound insight here. He teaches us that behaviors often labeled as problems, addiction, compulsive actions, or avoidance are not the root causes. Instead, they are signals, markers pointing toward deeper, unresolved wounds. The coping mechanism itself is a symptom, not the disease. It's a protective shield crafted to manage pain too difficult or dangerous to face directly. Healing is a process of excavation. It demands we gently but firmly lift the veil that coping mechanisms provide, not to punish or shame ourselves for survival strategies, but to see the pain underneath with compassion and clarity. Only by identifying the unmet needs, the fears, and the traumas driving these behaviors can we begin to address the source rather than just the surface. This requires a different kind of courage, the courage to feel what you've long avoided, to sit with discomfort instead of pushing it away, and to allow vulnerability without retreating into old patterns. Awareness transforms coping from a mindless reaction into a conscious choice. It opens the door to integration, where pain no longer needs to be hidden, but can be understood and processed. The paradox is that coping mechanisms lose their power over you when they become visible. Once you name the pain, once you acknowledge the fear, the compulsion starts to lose its grip. Awareness creates psychological space, which is the foundation of healing. It's where new responses become possible, responses grounded in self-knowledge, self-compassion, and a growing sense of agency. So the real challenge isn't to stop coping. That's unrealistic and harsh. The challenge is to become aware of how you cope, why you cope, and what lies beneath. When you cultivate that awareness, survival mode begins to loosen its hold, and the path toward genuine healing reveals itself. What might it mean for you to turn toward that inner landscape, even when it feels uncomfortable? Peace is often mistaken for the absence of problems or discomfort. But true peace isn't about managing symptoms. It's about moving beyond mere survival to address the root causes of your suffering. Coping mechanisms might keep the surface calm, but beneath, the unresolved pain, fear, or trauma continues to churn, unhealed and waiting for your conscious attention. The first step toward this deeper peace is recognition. You must identify the coping patterns that have become second nature, the ways you unconsciously try to numb, avoid, or control difficult feelings. This is not an exercise in self-criticism, but in mindful observation. Naming these patterns gives you power over them, transforming them from automatic scripts into conscious choices. Next comes understanding. It's one thing to recognize that you overwork, people please, or withdraw, but the more profound work lies in uncovering what pain or fear these behaviors are masking. Are you afraid of rejection? Overwhelmed by grief? Struggling with feelings of unworthiness? These questions require deep, sometimes uncomfortable introspection, but they guide you to the heart of your experience. Once you have this understanding, the real work begins, learning healthier ways to meet those needs. This doesn't mean eliminating discomfort or pain altogether. That's impossible. Instead, it means cultivating new strategies grounded in self-compassion, emotional honesty, and connection. This might look like setting boundaries where you once avoided conflict, expressing vulnerability instead of anger, or slowing down to listen to your body's signals instead of pushing harder. This path toward conscious healing is undeniably uncomfortable. It requires you to face truths you may have avoided for years. It asks you to sit with vulnerability and uncertainty without running away. But discomfort is the soil where transformation grows. Without it, peace remains superficial, a fragile truce with your pain rather than a deep resolution. Peace lies beyond coping, because it is a process of reclaiming your wholeness. It demands that you step off the treadmill of survival and walk the less traveled path of presence and awareness. This journey isn't easy or quick, but it is the only way to move from merely existing to truly living. What would it look like for you to embrace this process, even in its difficulty? First, let's clear this up. Coping isn't failure. It's survival. What you've done to get through your darkest moments, whether it was withdrawing, distracting, or numbing, was your brain and body's best attempt to protect you. There's no shame in that. Recognizing this truth is vital because self-judgment only deepens the wounds you're trying to heal. But surviving is not the same as thriving. Once the immediate danger is past, you face an invitation to move from unconscious coping to conscious choice. This means learning to hold your pain with awareness instead of pushing it away. It's about acknowledging what hurts without letting it control or define you. This shift is subtle but profound. It turns survival energy into a force for growth. Central to this shift is compassion toward yourself. Compassion isn't softness or indulgence. It's a clear-eyed kindness that recognizes suffering as part of the human experience. When you meet your pain with compassion, you lower defenses that keep you stuck in reactive patterns. Compassion dismantles the inner critic and creates the psychological safety needed to experiment with new ways of being. With compassion, choice emerges. You begin to notice when you're slipping into old coping habits and can gently redirect yourself toward more intentional responses. For example, instead of numbing through distraction, you might pause and breathe. Instead of lashing out in anger, you might express your feelings calmly or seek support. These choices don't erase pain, but they give you agency and open the door to healing. This process requires patience and practice because old coping mechanisms are deeply wired and familiar. It's normal to fall back into them, sometimes repeatedly. But each time you return with compassion and choice, you build new neural pathways, new habits that serve your growth rather than just your survival. Over time, these choices become your new default. Replacing coping with compassion and choice is a reclamation of your power. It's a commitment to yourself that you will no longer be defined or limited by survival strategies. Instead, you embrace your pain as a teacher and choose how to respond with courage, kindness, and clarity. How ready do you feel to meet your pain this way? And what fears or hopes arise as you consider this possibility? Your coping mechanisms have been your lifeline. They have carried you through storms when you had no other choice but to survive. But survival, by its nature, is about endurance, not about flourishing. If you want more than just to get by, if you want peace and a life that feels truly yours, then it's time to meet your coping with curiosity and courage. Ask yourself the questions that matter. What exactly is this coping strategy shielding me from? What parts of myself am I hiding or neglecting by clinging to it? These aren't easy questions. They demand honesty, patience, and a willingness to sit with discomfort. But they are the gateway to deeper understanding and transformation. You don't have to discard your survival tools abruptly. That would be reckless and unfair to yourself. Healing is a process of evolution, not revolution. It's about gently stepping beyond the patterns that once saved you, toward new ways of being that nurture presence, authenticity, and peace. Your peace lies not in resistance, but in conscious growth. Are you ready to walk that path?